The older I get, the more I realize that I know nothing. And this realization used to suck to some extent because younger me wanted to know everything and I wanted to be as knowledgeable as possible. And I thought that basically knowing a bunch of things would make people respect me and think I was intelligent and so on and so forth. But now I've just come to peace with this. There's a limit to the amount of knowledge we can acquire in life because at some point you just won't remember things that you've learned. But also, there are things that you will never be able to learn because you're not even aware that you don't know them. There are just so many instances in life where if you aren't aware of something, I don't know, whatever it may be, it could even be a random sport in some other country, or even the fact that some other random country exists on the planet in an obscure location, or that there's some little protozoa type thing on some other continent. There are just so many things that if you don't know that they exist, you aren't going to be able to acquire knowledge on them. So at some point, you just kind of realize you don't know all that much about anything. And that's okay because we as humans just won't be able to possibly know everything. It's impossible. It's not something that we can grasp. We're not omniscient. It's just, there's an extent to the amount of knowledge you can acquire. And the biggest roadblock there is things that you aren't even aware about. Because if you aren't aware of something you don't know about, then you can't possibly learn about it. But this isn't exactly my point with this video. It's more that I've just realized that life is incredibly nuanced. So beyond just this limit of knowledge that we can acquire, there's also a limit where we can only infer so much about different situations or people and things like that. Because, if you watch my videos, you know I tend to make a lot of generalizations, but there are situations where it's difficult to do that because we just don't have the full picture. We're missing information that would help us make better conclusions. And because life is so nuanced, where that happens so often, it makes me realize that you can't ever really make those blanket statements and be 100% accurate. That's why when I do generalize, I try to say as much as possible that of course there will always be outliers and that those generalizations don't always hold true because there are always going to be situations where things just don't work according to the norm. And that always happens. There's a bit of chaos in everything, but even beyond that, there's just so much nuance in everything. Life isn't black or white, it is incredibly gray. One situation, well, actually, if you have two situations that or two scenarios that are the exact same situation, if there's like one different variable in each one, it can completely change what would be the right thing to do in those situations. Just one variable would be enough to change everything. And that happens so often in life where there are just so many variables that it's difficult to come to conclusions. Like even when people ask me for relationship advice, there are just times where I could give them like the, I guess, common sense type stuff that, everybody says for relationship advice, and some of it may land, but I always want to help people more with their individual experience. But even then, if they don't give you the full picture, which is pretty difficult to do unless you were literally in their shoes, you could give them advice that may not be all that helpful because there's one variable that you're missing that you just aren't aware of. Because like I said, even if they try to explain everything to you, they're bound to miss something, or there just may be some aspect that they may not even be aware of. For instance, quite often when it comes to relationship things, there's another person involved. And if the person asking you for advice doesn't know how that other person thinks of them, then that other person's mindset is a whole different variable you can't account for because you don't know them, so you don't know how they think. And if the friend or the person asking you for advice can't tell you how their romantic interest thinks, then you're left in the dark. You can't make a conclusion. You can't quite help them to the extent that you'd be able to if you knew what their romantic interest was like and how they thought and their mannerisms and so on and so forth. So you just kind of realize at some point that it's difficult to even just give advice to other people because you can't account for everything. Now, of course, I will try to give them as good of advice as possible, and there are some things that are kind of universal, like usually when somebody is having relationship issues to some extent or dating issues, self-love is something that almost everyone should practice, and that's one of the main things I do recommend to people. Just practice the crap out of that. It'll help you tremendously. But if you want to give them that better advice that helps their specific situation, it can just be so difficult to do because you're going to have missing pieces of the equation. So I was just thinking about that, and I was like, I should make a video on this because there's just so many situations in life where we can't completely draw conclusions. I guess that's my point with this video, because we as human beings like to do that. We like to find patterns, we like to create predictable scenarios, but there are just so many times in life where things aren't quite predictable. Sure, they can be to some extent, but there's still going to be those variables that you can't quite account for. And that happens so often, and yet we still try to make conclusions, and quite often we can be so horribly wrong because we're making conclusions without utilizing all information possible, or we just aren't accounting for some variables because we may not even be aware of them. So I don't even know if this is like a philosophical conversation or what, but I just wanted to share my thoughts here. And I will leave you with one last thing, because I don't want this to just be some random stream of consciousness video with nothing to take from it besides us not knowing all that much and being unable to draw conclusions. If there's one thing that getting older has taught me in terms of us not knowing the full picture and always going to have this extent that our knowledge can reach, it's that we should all strive to be more open-minded. Because this fact that we can't quite learn everything and we can't fully draw conclusions, that should tell us that, hey, being open-minded is the right route to take. That means when you're presented with information, you can come to a conclusion, but leave room for doubt when you come to that conclusion. Don't become completely cemented in it and think that it's the 100% truth, because it may not be. There may be some variable that you weren't able to account for because you weren't aware of its presence. And if you come to a complete conclusion there and act like your conclusion is the correct one, you could still be wrong. So I've just learned being open-minded is the right way to go. And I do this so often in my life where I will make a conclusion, but I'll think in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's still like a 5% chance that I'm completely wrong here and that it's the exact opposite thing that I thought it was. And I'll acknowledge that. I'll leave room for that little chance of it being different than what I thought. And sometimes that chance is way higher. Sometimes I'll be like, okay, I'm like 60% confident that this is the correct thing, but that leaves 40% room for error. 40% chance that I could be wrong, but that's okay. We're not always going to have all information, and quite often we won't. That's what I've found to be the case. You won't often have all the information necessary. So just stay open-minded. It will help you tremendously. And that way, in those situations where your conclusions or your inferences, your hypotheses turn out to be wrong, you're not going to be devastated because you had that in the back of your mind. You had that knowledge that, hey, there's a chance I could be wrong here, and I'll be open to things working out in a different way than what I thought. But I mean, we're going to plan for option A, even if option B is something that could potentially happen. As long as you plan for option A and leave a little bit of room for option B, you'll be fine in life. So before I end this video, there's one thing that just came to mind. I've heard before, I don't remember who exactly said it, but Zan Perrione has mentioned it as well, where they say that the wisest people sit in questions, not answers, because there are just so many parts in life where we can't even answer things. Like, for instance, can we answer how the hell the universe exists and how everything is here within it? No, we can't. Scientists have basically theorized that there was a Big Bang, but they don't even know if that's correct. They don't. I mean, you can try to say that that's completely accurate, but can you truly prove that that's legitimately what created the universe? Who the hell knows? None of us were around back then to witness it. So we don't fully know if that's the real case, but obviously it's the method, or I guess option, we have tools to kind of suggest is the most likely scenario. We believe it to be the most likely thing that happened that created everything. But then even beyond that, you can say, well, then what the hell created or started the Big Bang? What set that in motion? We don't know. There are just so many things in life that we can't answer. So it's better to just sit in questions and be okay without having that answer, without being able to obtain that knowledge. Because even if you just sit in those questions, you're still going to learn and grow from them, because you're thinking outside of the box, as opposed to people who are always thinking in answers, which limits you, because there are things where we can't freaking answer them. So if you're sitting in answers, then hey, you're not going to grow as much as somebody who's sitting in questions, because they'll be thinking about, how are we all here? How does this all exist? What do I want from life? What is going to make me the most fulfilled? And that sort of thing. But anyway, I just wanted to leave you with that, because I feel like this is an intriguing conversation, but I don't even really know where to go with this video. So at least, if anything, just take out of it that you should sit in questions and be open-minded, because those things will help you get far in life, and they will help you acquire more knowledge, even though you'll know in the back of your mind that there is still an extent to the amount of things that you can learn, and you can't ever really learn what the things that you aren't even aware that you don't know that they exist and stuff like that. But anyway, before I ramble too much and make this video way too long, it already is too long, I'm going to end it here. If you like this video, please like, comment, and share. That's the easiest way you can support me and help the algorithm show this to more people's eyes. And I will see you guys in the next video. Arrivederci!